All right, well, welcome everybody to Solar Noon Tuesday and the year 2024. Amazing as that sounds. Let me go ahead and get started. The typical format that we have here is we're going to go through the week's solar news. Then I'll look at any announcements of upcoming webinars or events that are happening. And then we'll jump into a topic that's of interest, at least to me this week. And I thought this week's topic, we're going to go ahead and focus on some of the predictions for solar coming up over the course of the next year. This is the time of year everybody talks about who died last year and what's going to happen this year. So, and of course, the only thing we're certain about is the people who died. So anyway, it was another record year for solar in 2023, broke all the records. In fact, installations of solar PV grew about 55% year on year in 2023. Now, this was led by utility scale solar, which was actually up about 86% over the previous year. But there was a little bit of, statistic number crunching things in there because 2022 saw a lot of supply chain disruptions. So it was kind of playing catch up. So it wasn't quite as good as it looks like in 2023, nor quite as bad as it was in 2022. Right now, the US has about 161 gigawatts of solar installed. Now, that's enough to generate about 5% of all of the electricity needed on the grid. And what I found interesting is more than half of all of the solar that exists in the country has been installed since 2020. When we look at 2023, the number one source of new generating was solar, of course, with 54%. Now, battery storage on the grid, which is something that wasn't even really tracked up until a couple of years ago. Well, that's number two now, is 17% of new energy generating capacity is batteries on the grid. Natural gas has fallen down to number three. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. Wind, number 4, 11%, and nuclear. For the first time in quite a long while, we saw some nuclear added to the grid. This was basically a single reactor at a plant in Georgia, and that was installed or came online in 2023 with the help of a $12 billion loan guarantee from the federal government. So I will still maintain nuclear is quite dead. That was a death rattle, that one. All right, so despite a lot of the attention that lawmakers have been giving to interconnection and all of the backlog issues with interconnection, currently the backlog exists. There was really no movement on that in 2023. About 2,000 gigawatts of capacity is in backlog of wind, solar, and battery. Now, this is compared to about 1,250 gigawatts, which is the total generating capacity of the grid. So more is in the queue than exists on the grid in total as far as generating capacity. Now, they expect only about a quarter of this backlog to ever actually be built. Part of the reason for that, and one of the reasons that's causing all these queues, is because there's such a delay. Developers just kind of throw in applications for almost any speculative party because they know there's on average about 3.5-year wait for these things to get approved. So they just go, whether I'm going to build it or not, I better get it into the queue. So there's a lot of fluff in there. Now, even if it does get built, then the costs that the utilities are charging for these large scale developers has really skyrocketed. In the last 5 years, it's gone from an average of around 10% of the project's cost. And the utility charges these developers this, saying, all right, we're going to have to upgrade the grid to accommodate this new power that you're feeding onto the grid, and we're going to make you pay for it. So it's gone from about 10% to as much as 100% of the project cost. So basically doubling the cost of these solar farms just to pay the utility to accept the power from these utility farms. So that's another issue that's on the grid there with the whole interconnection issue. Solar plus storage, that's a big item, going to be even bigger. Currently, about 11% of all of the residential solar installations incorporate some form of battery storage in them. In 2018, when this became kind of a thing, it was really a competition between two manufacturers for battery systems. Essentially, Tesla and LG Chem, they had about 96% of the market for battery storage on residential systems. Since then, there have been a number of new players that have come onto the market. Tesla is still number one. With about 50% of the battery market installed. Enphase is now in second place with their battery system. They represent about 15% of the residential storage market. And LG Chem, now around 15%, similar to Enphase. SunPower has a system that's got 6, 7, 8%, somewhere in there. And then Solar Edge has their own proprietary battery, which to my eye, and I believe, but I don't have confirmation on this, that it's basically LG Chem, their battery with Solar Edge's label just slapped on it. So we could say that, LG Chem still has 23% of the market or so. All right, so those of you who have been on this webinar, podcast, whatever you want to call it, for a while know that California last year implemented what was known as net metering, or NEM 3.0. And as part of that, they changed all of the net metering agreement issues in California. They basically lowered the amount that consumers get paid by about 70%. And there was a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth when that started up, where people in the industry in California said, listen, if the Public Utility Commission goes through with this, it's going to devastate the market here in California. Well, kind of turns out they were right. In fact, installations in California have dropped by about 80% over the pre-NEM rulings. And the California Solar and Storage Association announced recently that 17,000 jobs in the solar industry in California have been lost as a result of this, which represents about 22% of the industry's workforce there. So what's happened? Well, we just saw that solar increased dramatically over the last year, while California has been suffering. So what's happened is California has been so dominant in this marketplace for so long. Well, they've basically been knocked off the top spot. There's still quite a strong area for solar development, but Texas is number one when it comes to solar installations with over 10 gigawatts. California's number two, followed by Nevada. Ohio, where I'm at, is number 4, amazingly. And then, of course, Colorado, New York, Wisconsin, Florida, Kansas, and Illinois. So those are the top 10 as far as what was installed in 2023. But if you're looking at cumulative totals, California is still far and away number 1. Texas, number 2. Florida, number 3. North Carolina, 4. Arizona, and then you can see where it goes off, Nevada all the way down through New York. So that's where the cumulative is. And so China, speaking of dominant players in the marketplace, has long been the dominant player as far as solar production, solar installations, solar panel manufacturing. And but I would say that they've got to start looking in the rearview mirror, because India is starting to catch up pretty quick. And I suspect over the next decade or so, we're going to see India become a major player in the solar industry worldwide. So India, of course, passed China last year as the most populous nation, and they're developing their solar market quite rapidly. In fact, 5 of the top 15 largest solar installations in the world are in India. And as an example of all of this, India's largest solar panel manufacturer, a company called Waaree Energies, has just announced that they're going to be opening a manufacturing plant near Houston, Texas. And that's they're going to be investing about $1 billion into this facility, looking at producing 3 gigawatts of solar panels each year. And they're anticipating that this will be online production by the end of 2024, this year. And it will employ about 1,500 people down there in the Houston area. And that is the news from the solar industry for this week. Does anybody have anything they want to add to that, or any comments, concerns, questions, things you want to bring up? I'll throw out, I know that Eric, I saw you on there. You sent me an article about a hydrogen integrated solar panel. Did you want to raise that one as an issue, since you know I'm such a fan of hydrogen?
I don't know if you're a fan of hydrogen or not, but given what my utility's trying to do with me, basically not allowing me to net meter in the future, I'm trying to figure out ways that I can load dump and still have access to energy. And that was a longer term solution. And the thing I liked about the fuel cell aspect of it was that the waste heat was actually used to heat your home in domestic hot water. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I got to figure out something.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, that's interesting. Well, maybe what we should do is a program on that, because I think one of my top trends, I don't want to give away, but it will sort of hit on some of the issues that you're raising there when I get into what I think are going to be some of the trends for 2024. All right. Getting into some of the announcements of what's happening in the solar industry, webinars and the like. Actually, you know, we took the month of December off, and it seems like everybody in the webinar industry sort of took the month of December off as well. So there really aren't that many coming up. I did find January 16th, there's a webinar here on solar trends coming up. It's through Transect, so you can look at that one if you would like. And then there's a conference coming up in San Diego, January 17th through the 19th. This is the Intersolar North America and Energy Storage North America, co-located there. And then I also thought I would point out, since there are so few webinars happening right here in the month of January, I suspect all that'll change for February. But there's a really good podcast that I've been listening to called Factor This. It's been around for a good long while. They have some very interesting topics that they touch on. So if you're a solar geek like me, consider just listening. Factor This. You can get that wherever you get your podcast. Oh, and speaking of that, I meant to mention, I didn't put it in here in a slide, but there is a really interesting short series podcast called Power Grab. It's from Ohio. WOSU, the public radio station in Columbus, Ohio State Universities. And it's all about the First Energy scandal, where basically First Energy paid off the state legislature here in Ohio to the tune of around $60 million. And they then received about $1.5 billion in subsidies, and it sort of gets into all the corruption that's associated with that. And it, as bad as you think it was, it turns out it was really a lot worse. So then I'll also mention about our online courses, since don't have very many to mention here. We do have the online courses and our upcoming classes. And I specifically wanted to point out, if you're interested in getting certification through ETA or even NABCEP, we've got some certification classes coming up. I've got a in-person one in Zane State. There's still, I think, one maybe seat available there coming up next week. Geez, already. And then we do have a hybrid version at Eastern West Virginia Community College, and that's right up near the Maryland border, to all the way east in West Virginia over near Washington, D.C. That one begins online with sessions January 16th, but then there'll be the face-to-face where we do the hands-on and the certification exam February 28th and 29th. And then we also have one coming up in Marietta, does the online hybrid the 16th of January for 6 weeks, and then face-to-face in Marietta, Ohio, March 2nd and 3rd. So I just thought I would shamelessly plug those if you are so inclined. All right, anybody, I'll give you guys an opportunity to chime in if you've got any other items here before I get into my perilous predictions for 2024. Anybody have anything for the good of the cause here? And again, feel free to, especially once I get into my predictions to disagree or to add things in or whatever. But it's the time of the year when we do these kind of predictions about what's happening, where the trends and the like. And I just thought I would kind of step back and say, all right, maybe not all of these are going to happen in 2024, but I think we're in a steady progression towards this. And I think we're going to start seeing 2024 as, the year when a lot of these things sort of gel, become a reality. Maybe they're only in the 1% club at that point, but they will become a dominant thing into the future. So I thought I'd start with some of the easy ones. We mentioned before the podcast got started here about community solar. And community solar is going to continue to grow. It's going to continue to be a thing. One of the real reasons is because a significant number of homes simply are not suitable for solar. And in case you're not familiar with the term community solar, this is essentially when a developer builds a very large solar array and then sells off portions of it to individual homeowners. So rather than 100 people putting 10 panels on a home, you would have, do the math or whatever, 10,000 panels and allocated individually to these homes. But the utility has to be involved in that process. And in some states, they've mandated this. In other states where they haven't mandated this, the utilities are not all that keen to help out. So, but community solar is going to become a thing because there's just a lot of reasons, economies of scale in the development of the projects. But then I think the big reason is because according to studies, roughly about 80% of the homes simply are not suitable for rooftop solar. The main reasons for that is you might not be the owner of the building. Maybe you're renting it. This is true with commercial as well as residential, or a condominium owner where you have a shared roof space, so you don't own the roof. You may own your unit, but you don't own the roof. The roof may be unsuitable. For example, the office here where I'm sitting is in an old Victorian home. Well, the roofs are pretty straight up and down with a lot of dormers and slate, and there's just not that much open roof space. So doesn't really make sense for rooftop solar there. And then of course, tree shading, adjacent building shading, things like that. So community solar does away with all of that because you're just going to pick a suitable field somewhere and do community solar. Or as we did see, warehouse rooftop in urban environments is a very good location for community solar. I think I reported on that a week or so ago, or not a week, it's a month ago now. All right, so as I mentioned, despite all of the backlog, all of the discussion within lawmakers and the like saying they're going to clean up the mess of the permitting process, it's still a mess, and there's been no progress on that. So what I think is, well, I'm skeptical that progress will be made. So where is the solar going to be installed? It's going to be installed where it can be installed. And if you look at the map of the backlog for these large systems, you can see that it's not evenly spread. So I suspect what we're going to see is a lot of new projects being built in the southeastern United States, because traditionally they've been resistant to solar and there's not a lot of people in the queue. So if I'm a developer, I don't really care where I hook this stuff up. I'm just going to try and get it onto the grid. So southeastern US, in the Midwest, and by the Midwest, I mean Kansas, Oklahoma, the Prairie West. I guess since I'm in Ohio, I think of Ohio as the Midwest, but I'm always surprised the Midwest seems to go from Ohio all the way to Colorado, and that seems a bit too big. And then up in the Northeast, you get up in there, Maine, that area, there's some openings. So if you just look at the map, where's it going to be? I really think we're going to see a focus on southeastern US. A lot of people there, a lot of opportunity for the growth of solar there. So when we look at our map of where was the big activity happening, you're always going to see it in the most populous states, California, Texas, New York. But I think we're going to see Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, a lot of those kind of places. And Mississippi, of course, or Louisiana have been traditionally low cost electricity, but I don't think that really matters if you're selling the power back in a power purchase agreement back to a utility. Another easy prediction is load management. So individual loads, it's just going to be the norm in every single installation, in every single new home. You're going to be able to control your loads on a circuit by circuit, or even in some cases on a load by load basis. This picture that I've got here is one of the SPAN smart utility service panel. And I was talking to a large installer in West Virginia, and he said that their practice now when they install a system in a home is to just install one of these. They want individual load management there to be able to control these loads. So it's a pretty big expense at the moment. I think it adds $2,500 or $3,000 to something like that. But you're just going to see it in all new construction and in any major retrofit. It's just going to pay for itself. As I mentioned before in the intro here in the solar news, solar plus storage becoming a thing. Pretty safe bet that's going to continue to rise. When we look at both on the utility scale as well as on the residential scale, you just see that the growth of solar plus storage climbing dramatically. It's going to continue to climb. One of the reasons for this is, of course, the grid is not really dependable. There's a lot of issues with the pricing structures that the utilities are putting out there. So when they put in time of day pricing, or they put in, demand load charges and things like that, it just makes sense to integrate storage into your system. And speaking of storage, the integration of electric vehicles into this whole mix is kind of, to my way of thinking, the biggest thing in the world of solar that's going to be coming to the industry in 2024. This is the year electric vehicles become the thing, and the integration of solar plus electric vehicles. And we'll get into the bidirectional charging here in a second. But as of March 2023, for example, 4% of all Americans owned electric vehicles. But of those people who own electric vehicles, 1/3 of them have solar on their homes. So there's a very large correlation between people who put solar on their homes and people who are early adopters of electric vehicles. So that's a marketplace that exists already, and we're just going to see that grow. But when we look at the number of models of electric vehicles, it's just going to go crazy. I mean, you see that just a few years ago, there were only 1 or 2 models of electric vehicles. And by the end of this coming year, I think if I can read that right, it's 134 models of electric vehicles that automakers have announced. Pretty much every major automaker is shifting to electric vehicle only. They're phasing out their internal combustion engines, and the pricing is going to come down. Speaking of India, which I did before, I really anticipate an Indian invasion of low-cost electric vehicles at some point. And the sales forecasts just continue to be under forecast. This diagram I thought was kind of interesting, where every time they project it to follow kind of a straight line growth, the growth accelerates on the adoption of electric vehicles. So we're looking at pretty dramatic, where we only have 4% at the moment, but really under this, within a couple of years, you're talking 15% of all the vehicles going to be electric on the road. And of course, from the world of solar, one of the things that I'm looking forward to is the time that we have true bidirectional charging of your electric vehicles. So currently that only exists, well, the Ford Lightning has their own proprietary bidirectional charging process. It's pretty expensive. I've heard, and I haven't really verified it, but it seemed to me it was like $8,000 to get the bidirectional charger. It also costs, or it uses about 80 amps. So there's going to be another cost of upgrading your service to make sure that you can take advantage of this bidirectional charging. I know the Nissan Leaf has for a while been the only EV that allows for bidirectional charging in their warranty. So really, unless you had a Leaf or a Ford Lightning, bidirectional charging was just not a thing. Some of the things that had been impediments to this had to do with no standardization of protocols for charging, and not even standardization of the plugs that you use on these things. But then how are the various automakers going to deal with their warranty issues? Because most of their warranties are dealt with on a mileage basis. But you could have an electric vehicle that just sits in your garage and you're cycling it, running through the battery cycles every day, and wearing out the battery, but not driving it at all. So that seemingly could be problematic for them. So they're going to have to address that. But in 2023, the end part of 2023, we saw essentially the automakers kind of all coalescing on the fact that Tesla has invested in a widespread charging network and nobody else has. So if we're going to want people to charge our electric vehicles, we better all sort of jump on the Tesla bandwagon and start to use their plugs, use their protocols for the charging. So really, when there was just announced that standardization on Tesla, BMW, Ford, GM, Honda, Hyundai, Mercedes, Nissan, Toyota, Volkswagen, and even more have now all standardized on the Tesla charging. And we'll have to see how that works out. But it seems like all of these companies are now moving towards a common charging standard. So I think we'll see that solidified in 2024. Yeah, Chris, you had a comment there?
I've been talking to a lot of people in Canada, United States, and the biggest problem I'm finding is people are getting really annoyed and finding when they replace the batteries, it's going to cost them about $20,000.
Yeah, so it's just as far as the vehicle cost, that'd be more not a charging thing, but just an EV barrier. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of almost like saying, though, if the engine on my car blows, it's expensive. So
but an engine in the car goes, it could be 200,000 miles, and they're saying these guys are saying 4 or 5 years down the road, I've got 60,000 miles on there, and I got to spend $20,000 on a battery.
Yeah.
There.
Well, I know that my EV, the battery was warranted for 100,000 miles. So, I think that's kind of, I think they'll get around some of that barrier by warranting them. So.
Well, and of course, the other big problem they have in Canada is the cold.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is their mileage they're getting is dramatically reduced, particularly this time of year.
Yeah, I see that.
In a warm environment, they sell batteries and electric and all that is really fine, but when we start looking at the cold weather up north, it's not working.
Yep. I agree, and I suspect what you're going to see is a lot of heating elements within the battery banks, which is going to sap some of the electricity.
I think the one guy talked to had an F-150 Lightning, and I think he said he got I don't know the exact numbers. He was getting 400 miles per charge. Then if he towed something, he got like 280 miles per charge towing something. And then in the wintertime, he says, I don't even bother because I can't go anywhere. He says, it's just, I might get 100 miles. So,
well, I would say it's his fault for living in Canada,
Hey.
Uh-huh.
All right, with that,
we just lost all of those folks. I think there's certain barriers to EVs. We've seen that with range anxiety, but now that the EV batteries are getting larger and bigger, that becomes less and less of an issue. We've seen it with charging times, but with the fast chargers, they're addressing that. I think we'll see it with battery chemistry technologies, where we begin to address the fact that cold weather is not so good as warm weather as far as using these. So all of these it's still early days in this industry. And in many respects, I think the automakers are adopting it too quickly, I mean, without having worked through a lot of these concerns. But it's a thing. It's a thing that's going to happen. And we're going to have to address it. I think 2024, I think we'll start to see legitimate bidirectional charging systems on the market. Enphase, for example, has announced that they've got a bidirectional for their charging station. They did announce this year their charging station, but it doesn't do bidirectional charging. It does some load management and some clever little things, but it doesn't really address bidirectional charging. They're claiming it will by the end of next year. We'll believe it when we see it, but certainly I would say by the end of 2025, we're going to see these real legitimate ones on the marketplace there. So, Jay, did you have a question? I see you pop up there.
Yes. You used the word protocol between the Tesla chargers and the others. This may be just local. We have a charitable organization. I'm part of Sustainable Energy Network with one standard charger, level 2, and one Tesla charger, and the level 2, 9 years old, burned out. So I've now charged my old Leaf with a Gilhooly and a Tesla charger. But is there anything more to it than just the connectors?
Yeah, I think that there is, and I don't want to pretend to be an expert on it, but I know in our discussions with Tony, who has been on this several times and is a manufacturer, there's one big option, which is, do you do the AC to DC conversion on the vehicle, or do you do it in the charger? So that's one issue, but it seems like all of the management has sort of settled into the vehicle. So now the vehicle has to determine how much can it draw through the charger, what kind of process does it use in the charging of the vehicle. And there are software protocols, there are some hardware issues like the connectors that you're talking about, but I think that those are all going to be harmonized. So my understanding is not every vehicle that could physically hook up to a Tesla charger can work using a Tesla charger. So, but that's changing quickly. But what you may find is some vehicles can't get the same capacity, the same charging rate, because their batteries are smaller or their wiring is different or whatever. So you might be able to get, 60 amps, 80 amps, 100 amps with one vehicle out of the charger, but you can only get 40 amps with another one. But that's going to be internally controlled. It's just going to affect how long it takes for it to be charged. But that's all that kind of stuff internally that they're going to have to work out. And I just think that the economic incentives are there for them to work it out. Now they're just going to have to say, okay, well, instead of us dealing with our warranties based on mileage, it seems to me simple to just say, let's base it on power throughput of the battery system, as opposed to, X number of miles, which is old uses. If you're cycling your battery a lot, maybe the warranty is less long. It's all based on that, as opposed to based on how many rotations of the wheel, take place. So it's all doable.
Would that cause me on my solar array system that I would have to switch up my inverter because my inverter would not be compatible with the bidirectional?
Yes, that would be a for sure. Unless they come out with systems that are kind of independent of your system. So kind of a bidirectional charging station that works whether you have a solar array or not. Think of it like a Tesla Powerwall with a charger attached to it. That really doesn't care if you've got solar or not. But for example, with the Enphase system, and that's one I'm pretty familiar with, you actually connect your charging station into the smart switch that's part of your system. And in order to make that work, you actually have to have their latest edition of the smart switch. So yeah, you'd have to upgrade your equipment to be compatible, which is one of those downsides of all of this. So yeah, I mean, I made the mistake when we installed the system here, thinking that I did want to eventually have bidirectional charging. So I went ahead and got the smart switch, and I went ahead and got the Clipper Creek charging station, because Enphase had just bought Clipper Creek and they said it was compatible. But then when they announced their new system, even this interim system before bidirectional charging, none of the things that I have are compatible with this interim one. And the interim one's not compatible with the new one. So, you know, they use different communications protocols and things like that. So yeah, it's almost like smartphones anymore. Nothing, they just keep wanting you to buy new equipment. So all right, this gets into some of the more speculative things, I think, but this is good if people want to argue with it, but I don't think you will. I think this is the year the utilities kind of take off the gloves and attack solar in some pretty heavy handed ways. We've seen some of that in disjointed ways, but I think at this point, solar becomes an existentialist threat to their livelihoods. We've seen that the cost of electricity has gone up on average here since the 1970s, almost 3% a year, year in and year out, which is kind of interesting because when I did the research, I found that the cost of electricity has essentially not changed. And this is the sort of levelized cost. So in 1985, the primary source of electricity was coal at that point, the primary fuel. Well, the levelized cost of producing electricity, of generating the power, was 4 cents a kilowatt hour in 1985, and the average cost was 8 cents per kilowatt hour charged by utilities. So 50-50. And in my mind, that's always the kind of what we've said. About half the cost is in generation, about half the cost is all the other overhead stuff. Transmission, distribution, and of course, executive salaries. 2023, fast forward, the levelized cost of solar, which is making up most of the new power, 4 cents. The average cost of electricity is 16 cents. So now rather than half and half, it's 1/4 goes to generation and 3/4 goes to overhead. Well, we know where the money's going, but it's not going into upgrading of the grid or upgrading of the transportation systems. It's going into truly overhead. So this is essentially a behavior. Well, the utilities have got addicted to fat profits. Now, it's supposedly a regulated industry. Well, the regulation system through the Public Utilities Commissions is a joke. It just simply doesn't work. You get on the Public Utilities Commission so you can become a consultant to the utility and make a lot of money. Once again, in that Power Grab podcast, they pointed out that the chairman of the Ohio Public Utilities Commission received a $4 million bribe from First Energy the week before he was put in as chairman of the Public Utilities Commission. So it's an open secret, and it's not even a secret. So we've got essentially a utility system that is on the verge of an existential change, but they're addicted to heavy profits with a regulatory system that just simply doesn't work. So this is all lining up to be kind of a mess when it comes to that combat. And we've seen it with the net metering 3.0 in California, where they reduced compensation by 70%. My utility here locally, they charge $42 a month just because I have solar for access fees, but if I didn't have solar, they charge you $20. So they're penalizing the solar. We're seeing a lot of the costs being diverted away from generation to distribution and transmission because you can't bypass that. So we're seeing that. So then my other prediction here, and Eric sort of brought it up early on with his problems with the local utility, is I think we're going to see a massive shift towards, I'm just going to do without the utility. I'm just going to go independent. I'm going to make my system off grid. We're already kind of halfway there. You know, we've seen that grid tied was the cheapest, but now a significant portion are putting battery backup into their systems because the grid is unreliable. And now the grid pricing structure is such that you're punishing you for using electricity. So we can use batteries to mitigate some of that punishment. But now they're saying, okay, well, we're going to start putting other impediments like huge access fees, things of that nature to hook up to the grid. So we're very, very close to just saying, you know what? I don't need you. I don't need you anymore. I'm going to just simply go independent. And of course, if you're a substantial distance from the roadway, for instance, within a rural location, the cost of hooking up to the grid can be more than the cost of installing a standalone solar system. So I've told utility company people who will listen that they've got to get into the mindset that the grid has to provide more than just power. There has to be a reason other than getting electricity for me to connect to the grid, because I can provide power for myself. So thinking of it like an energy internet would be a better perspective. And these people could have a very long life if they come up with services associated with connection to the grid over and above just the simple delivery of power, because they're doing a pretty crappy job of it, and they're charging a lot of money for it. So consumers now have the option of saying, all right, well, I'm going to opt out. And I think we're going to start to see this becoming a trend in 2024 of folks just saying, you know what, I can do this by myself, especially if I can integrate an electric vehicle as part of my battery storage process, because that electric vehicle can be quite can get you through some pretty serious long periods of time if the weather is unruly for a great period of time. And I think especially this is going to get jump started if we do have some sort of event, which is highly possible, where a large portion of the electric grid gets knocked out of service for a significant portion of time. It might be a natural disaster. It might be an act of terrorism. It might be just poor maintenance. Who knows? But we've had some near misses, and I suspect we're due for a bigger catastrophic event. So then my final one, it wouldn't be a prediction of 2024 if I didn't throw in my favorite, artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence being integrated into solar, just like it's going to be integrated into everything. I can sort of expand my general predictions for 2024 saying that I believe 2024 is going to be like the watershed year of artificial intelligence, where general artificial intelligence becomes a thing. But within the world of solar, matching design with consumption. Currently we say, okay, give me a copy of your electric bill and I will design you a system. If you want to be really clever, I can say, give me your electric bill and I'll do a month by month comparison and get the angle of it based on your optimal month use versus production. Well, now we can get into some things where you can design the system based on real-time data of how that person is consuming electricity, when they're consuming it, what time of day they're consuming it, and design a system optimally that produces the best for their behavior pattern. Demand management, as I mentioned, where you can load demand every single load within your house. And of course, at the utility scale, it can be done, system-wide. Demand management is a big issue. Artificial intelligence in load shifting or demand shifting, battery management. When do you charge the battery? When do you not charge the battery? How do you bidirectionally move this power around? That can be done real time through artificial intelligence. Monitoring, updating, troubleshooting, even maintenance and repair could be done without human intervention using artificial intelligence. Big item would be upgrading customer service. I mean, I think by the end of 2024, you're going to be hard pressed to call anybody and get a customer service person who's actually a human being. You're going to be dealing with artificial intelligence as far as, for customer service. And I think that's going to improve waiting times. It's going to improve customer service there. Virtual power plants. How do we integrate large numbers of electric vehicles into virtual power plants? Well, that's going to have to be done through artificial intelligence. And the one that they really should focus on first, but I have very little hope that they will, is clearing the backlog of interconnection applications through the use of artificial intelligence. It'd be nice if they put some level of intelligence in there somewhere. And whether it's artificial or human, I would like them to see them do that, but it doesn't seem to be a big priority. And those are my predictions. Anybody have any quick comments on? I went through all of those very quickly. Disagree or agree or think it's all crazy?
I'm going to just jump in with the question here. If hypothetically you had solar panels, batteries, electric cars, and had no intention of ever putting electricity into the grid, I don't think the power company would necessarily know that. But B, do the tax incentives qualify for that, or do you have to be putting money into? You have to be grid linked?
I don't think that the Inflation Reduction Act requires it to be linked to the grid.
It does not. It doesn't, Jack. I'm sure.
Okay. Hey, Don. Yeah, you're saying it does not, right?
It does not. So you could, if you're off grid, which I am, you still get your credits.
That's good. I know that RECs, when you had renewable energy certificates, you had to be on the grid. But
Right.
I think this is different. This is just simply tax credits.
Yeah.
Okay.
On that panel that you showed with energy management in it,
Yeah.
okay, can you get a little bit more Southmork on that?
Oh, well, basically what it is it's a circuit breaker panel, but each circuit can be independently monitored and controlled through your phone, basically. So you can say, give priority to these loads based on available electricity, or turn this one on or off at this particular time. Or let's say that you go off, you live in Illinois, but you move down to Florida, and you get down to Florida and you're going, gosh, did I turn off my hot water heater? I don't remember if I did or I didn't. You can get on your phone and turn it off. So you basically have control at the circuit breaker level of all of your loads remotely, and you can program them.
Okay.
So any other, yeah, I know Luther just said a lot of his friends are off grid now. Well, of course, it's Luther that we're talking about. So all his friends are still cooking with solar cookers.
Yeah. So I guess an interim solution is zero export. And what we're seeing is that people who don't want to deal with the utility company are just putting up a system that the utility company doesn't even know about because they're not exporting any electricity. And in my opinion, the net metering is the only leg the utility company has to stand on to deny. They say, we don't want your power. I don't care if even if it's free, we don't want it. And that's a leg that they have to stand on. But so if we don't export anything, what right does the utility company have to say anything? We're just using less electricity. We're not, when we sign up with the grid, we don't sign up that we have to buy so much electricity from them a month. We just pay the base rate, and anyway,
well, I would comment on that, saying that I know my utility explained to me that because I'm using less electricity, their costs remain the same for giving me a hookup to the grid. So they're going to allocate their costs differently for me to have that hookup. There are other instances, for instance, with sewer and water systems in cities, where the cities come in and say, if this is available to you, you must hook up to it. So I could see the utilities using their political clout to say, if it is available, you have to connect to it and you have to pay us. I don't know how enforceable that is. But currently the only advantage, if you're talking about non-export, is that you're using the grid as a backup. You know, so you're trying to self-consume your generation as much as possible. But if the grid makes it difficult to use them as a backup, maybe somebody else, like a battery or a Tesla vehicle or a battery, you know, whatever, is a better option, is a better backup than the grid.
Oh, it certainly is. It's just that batteries are so expensive and high maintenance, whereas, you know, plugging in a solar panel is so easy. And then setting a profile on your Enphase system is one I'm familiar with, to not export any electricity. They wouldn't even know it's there.
Yeah. Yep. Well, in theory, although they're probably going to use artificial intelligence to go out and see if you've got panels, who knows? I don't disagree with you. I think the grid has, up to this point, been a very low cost, infinite battery compared to the cost of other batteries. But what they're doing is making that no longer true. You know, as the cost of lithium ion batteries and other battery sources like EVs gets cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, and the cost of the grid gets more and more expensive, at some point those lines cross. And at that point, the option of staying off grid, unless they give me some other reason to join, you know, unless now the grid is some sort of interesting energy community where you use that connectivity for the production and conduction of different energy services. Like I could see security systems, you know, monitoring each appliance. You know, there could be other services that are associated with that interconnectivity, but they just haven't been focusing on that to their own peril, I think.
The other thing, Jay, is there the government subsidizing electric company, gas companies and stuff like that?
Oh, for sure, for sure. Now,
So
you
we're
know,
not really seeing what the real cost of energy is. If the subsidies stopped going to the utilities companies, what do you think our bill would be then?
I don't know. That's an impossible question. I think, you know, if they
It'd
didn't
be
pay
higher.
if they didn't pay their CEOs $300 million a year, what would our energy cost be? You know, I mean, the system is so messed up.
Right.
I think America is definitely addicted to cheap energy, and in large measure, our government policy has been to subsidize that. If you compare that with Europe, where they have tended to have much more expensive energy, I saw, for instance, Germany is the use of self-storage is just skyrocketing. So I think we're moving in that direction, just not as quick as some of those other countries.
If you add in the subsidy, can you still say we have cheap energy?
Yeah, relatively. I mean, what's cheap? I mean, how much would you pay for your electricity in your home? If it were suddenly double, I think almost all of us would still buy it.
I
You
mean,
know, we might conserve.
our energy is pretty cheap. Think about it. Gas has for a long time been a byproduct. They were selling just to get rid of it, as opposed to in Europe. It was a good example where they have to tank it in either from Russia or someplace else. I mean,
Yeah.
our energy is pretty cheap. Our profile. I mean, for all that they say about America and this and that, we still produce more oil than anybody else. We consume more, but we produce a lot too.
Yep. Yeah, when I look at the cost of $42 a month for hooking up to the grid, I've always said, you know, that's annoying, but it's a cheap battery. You know, I mean, it's a lot cheaper than me going out and buying a system, a battery bank, and making payments on it. But I'm just saying this is the trend line. You know, we're in early days here, and I think if things continue to progress the way they're progressing, we're going to see a growing number of people opting out of connecting to the grid. I think we're a long way from that being the majority, probably never. But if you get to 1%, 2%, 5%, that's significant. Anybody else have any comments before we call it a day?
I had one question, Jay. Have you seen in the news lately? They've been talking a lot about the. I saw the trend line. I saw or I heard your discussion about the sales of EVs. But they're saying, at least right now, there's a glut. It's like all the people who want EVs have bought them, and now they're stacking up on the dealerships lots. Do you think that's a temporary glut, or is there a we have to get through the people who wanted them already? Everybody who wanted them ran out and got them. For 2 years, you couldn't even get on the list to get a Ford Lightning, and now they're having trouble moving them off the lot.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you think that bulge is going to go through the system?
I think the bulge it's a matter of pricing. You know, what they did is they said, like with the Ford F-150 or the Lightning, they said, oh, we've got this product here. It's going to be great. And it's going to cost you $45,000. And then you go down to buy one and they're going, well, you know what? We're going to charge you $80,000. And everybody go, oh, well, you've got some early adopters who that was not an issue. But if they dropped the price to 40,000, those things would fly out of the dealership. So it really is just a matter of pricing it to where they don't feel like they've got to make a reasonable profit as opposed to making an exorbitant profit just because demand was high and supply was tight. But I could see I could see once again getting some sort of really inexpensive Indian EV where the cost is like under $10,000 for a nice little vehicle. I mean, that's gonna be quite a market disruptor. So, it's because the cost of producing an electric vehicle is much less than the cost of producing a internal combustion engine vehicle.
You said I don't doubt that, but on the other hand, on the same news programs I was watching, and it was over a couple different stations had kind of the same against the CEOs talk about it, but the U.S. government came out and said on average the U.S. manufacturers were losing $36,000 on each EV they produced. Now I don't know if that's because they're not to scale or not. It's not Tesla, I know that because I know they're making money, but it's the other ones. It's the traditional manufacturers, Ford, GM, and the rest of them.
Yeah, I mean, my initial reaction on that is that old Mark Twain thing of there's lies, damn lies, and statistics. It's like if you have to build a brand new plant to manufacture something and you're only selling a few of them, you're going to lose a lot of money on that item in the early days. If you allocate the costs across that, depending on how you're allocating.
No question, you could play with the numbers. Yes, I agree with that.
Yeah. My guess is once they get up.
I agree with you. I think it's the, like gearing up to make these a completely different kind of thing. And, the whole supply chain issues and stuff, that'll work itself out as demand rises.
Yeah, they wouldn't be switching over if this was not a profitable venture in the long run.
They're legally required to. Because of the emissions, they're legally required to switch over. There's no other way they could make the emissions.
Well, in California for sure, and I know most of them follow California's lead.
Yeah,
but
no, Jay, that's the same in all of North America.
They all follow California.
Penalties after penalties because they weren't making the emission standards.
Yep.
So they have to go to solar. I mean, or electrical. They don't know how to get that meet the standards if they don't.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was talking about people in both countries, the bottom line is they don't like it. There's $40,000 and then $8,000 for the charger and then $8,000 for this. And then the batteries have to be replaced every 10 years. And then they can't find a place to plug it in. I mean, when you put all that together, would you buy one?
I would.
It didn't help when they all raised the price of $7,500 as soon as the tax credit went into effect.
Yeah, that's one of those things. Yeah. That's always very annoying. I remember when Ohio had a $50,000 subsidy for solar, and everybody raised their prices $50,000 to put solar on your home. So that artificially inflates the price by having the tax credit. And if you go in to buy one of these, they'll map it all out to show you this is how much it is here, but this is how much you're going to end up paying. So isn't that a lot better? And in the meantime, they're cashing your check. So somebody's definitely making some money. But But I think, you know, we can argue that this is a good thing or a bad thing. I think the transition to electric is good in the long run, but it doesn't mean that it's not going to cause some short-term hassles and annoyance. There are other people, the people who are traditional motorheads, who this is the death of an era. You know, I mean, they just liked vehicles the way they were, you know, and that's something they're, you know, I suspect that just makes your internal combustion engine a collector's item, and stick it in the garage and sell it for $100,000 in 5 years. So,
Well, the industry's got 11 years to figure it out, don't they? Because by 2035, it has to be all electric.
yeah, yep,
That's
right,
not
well,
a big time frame for automotive.
yeah. I think that's a good note to call it a day, and we'll see you all. I'm gonna have to say that next week I'll be off again. I'm teaching a class, but then we'll get up and go for the rest of the year. I think every week, starting in 2 weeks. All right. So take care. We'll see you guys
Thanks,
later.
Jay.
Thank you.
Happy New Year's, Jay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Happy New Year.